First and foremost, I think lack of clarity when it comes to roles and processes.
Mm.
And so it's really hard to be set up for success as a leader if roles are gray, if people don't know what's expected of them and they don't know what's expected of other people. And so we have to really look at the organization as a whole. That's one area. It's like, oh, I can hear it.
Well, Candice, thank you for being here today. I'm extremely excited to have this conversation. You and I were connected through Lisa, and I would just say she speaks very highly of you. I know you and I had a kickoff conversation, but you just have a phenomenal background. I think you have a lot to offer people today, and I'm really excited to dive in because you just have a wealth of knowledge about the topic of creating and developing leaders. And you actually have a very interesting book as well that hopefully we get some time to touch on towards the end of this conversation. So, with that said, Candice, welcome to the Habitual Growth Podcast. But please tell the audience who you are, what you do, and what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you for having me, Nathan. And yes, I was very excited to get in contact with you through Lisa. She's a fantastic leader. I'm Kandis Porter. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Effective Flow Connections. And we work with a lot of organizations to help them deliver on their mission even better. So we focus a lot on project management, change management, leadership development, process improvement and absolutely love what I do. A little bit about my background. I grew up in a small town in Missouri, a tiny little farm town. So we were really grown up in that environment where your mom kicks you out early in the morning and tells you to come back at dark. So riding our bikes, all the fun stuff. And I eventually went to the Air Force at a young age where I was a weather forecaster. So doing flight weather for pilots, which was very interesting, very technical type of job, and eventually became a services officer. So really stepping into that leadership type position. And one thing about Department of Defense, I think that they do a good job of developing their leaders. So got a lot of training in that area, which I enjoyed. Eventually got out. My last duty station was at the Pentagon. I was a captain there and transitioned into management consulting from there. So went to a very large management consulting company in Washington, D.C. area, eventually moved out west and worked for a small consulting company in San Francisco. And just shy of 10 years ago, started my own company, which I absolutely love.
Amazing. I love that background. Thank you for your service, first and foremost. That's incredible. And we appreciate everything that you do for this country. Um, really just kicking things off. And I'm sure you see this in the military as well. As you had mentioned, the military produces very good leaders. You have spent the better part of a decade, as you have mentioned, just with effective flow communications, around developing leaders. So you've seen CEOs, you've seen middle managers, you've seen executive leaders. What would you say maybe the top three things that constantly come up in leadership or teams discussion to make an organization be more productive, or how do we develop our people or create a better culture? What are, the top two or three things that impact an organization's growth?
First and foremost, I think lack of clarity when it comes to roles and processes.
Mm.
And so it's really hard to be set up for success as a leader if roles are gray, if people don't know what's expected of them and they don't know what's expected of other people. And so we have to really look at the organization as a whole. That's one area. The second one is really more about the individual leader. And I see this a lot. It's avoidance to have those tough conversations.
Mm.
And I love Brene Brown, and I think that she has a great quote. She says, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." And I think that a lot of individual contributors get promoted into leadership positions or people manager positions, and they don't get that training on how to give feedback,
Mm.
on how to set expectations, on how to hold people accountable. And so they feel bad giving people feedback that the people on the receiving end, they deserve
Yeah.
because it's going to hurt their career if they don't get it
Mhm.
and they don't have the opportunity to develop. So that's number two,
Okay.
avoidance of tough conversations. It's one that I see very often.
Yeah.
And I'd say three, failing to connect strategies, organizational or department or team strategy
Hmm.
to that day to day execution. And if you're focusing on the wrong things as a leader and not able to connect the dots or pull the thread all the way through, here's my team's kind of daily work and tying it back to those strategies, then it's hard to be set up for success.
Yeah. Those are great. I feel like I've lived through all of those. I've been, as as we were sharing kind of offline previously, my background is everything from startups and running my own business to working for a Fortune 12 company. And I've seen all of those things happen in my career. And it doesn't really matter what size of the organization is. I think it really comes down to the vision, the leadership at the top, and how well, to your point, it's communicated through. Do you think the military does a better job of creating the roles and relationships more so than organizations do? And if so, how do they do it differently? How can organizations maybe do structure the roles and responsibilities a little bit better?
I think the military does have a very clear structure. And I know that this will be a little bit of a sidetrack of what you're asking, but that was one of the areas that I had to work on a lot after leaving a military structure. So in the military, whoever's got the highest rank is the one that gives the orders and people do what they're asked. When I got into management consulting world, I realized that it doesn't really matter if you have authority a lot of times. If you're not leading through influence, people aren't going to do what you're asking them to do. People want to know the why, and you really need to take it a step further. And so, military, yes, clear structure, who's the highest rank, what is being asked of us, and there's very thorough training. There are standard operating procedures for almost everything. So there's not much of a gray area at all when you get into other organizations, and I think everyone has good intent
Hmm.
most of the time.
Hmm.
It could be a company that grew from very small and scaled quickly, and they really haven't had the opportunity or the time or the focus on documenting things or saying, okay, now we're hiring a bunch of new people. And what does the structure look like? And does it need to look and feel different from our
Hmm.
prior structure?
Hmm.
So sometimes it just happens organically and it's not defined. So I think that as leaders, we need to ask those questions. If we're not clear what's expected of us, we need to ask questions. If we have ideas or see challenges regarding structure, roles, and so forth, then let's propose some solutions, being proactive.
Yeah, that's great. And you got me thinking as you were, talking about, you use the word influence, leading through influence. And obviously we hear that term a lot. When you're entering an organization to do a lot of the work that you're doing, let's look at the leadership. Let's look at the relationship between a manager and the employees, and tying this really back to kind of your second point of what organizations run into, some of the bigger issues, which is I'm gonna use the word boundaries as the word. But basically having those tough conversations. What is the boundary that you lead up against? I feel like the military has more boundaries set in place. When people get promoted to middle management, sometimes, as you had mentioned, they're not necessarily trained to have those difficult conversations. And those difficult conversations can go upwards towards leadership. They can also go downwards towards the people that are working for that manager. So do you think it's a training of, hey, we can create these leaders, how to have better conversations? Do you think it's related to confidence in somebody that has been a leader for some time? They've kind of worked their way up the ranks, or is it something else maybe that organizations can do a little bit differently?
I think it's all of the above. You outlined it lovely. I think training is a big part of it.
Okay.
Think that there is a moment in time when someone's promoted and they're stepping into that leadership role.
Hmm.
I think that's a great time to invest in that leader.
Hmm.
And whether the organization does it in cohorts, which I think is a great idea. We have our new leader cohort and we have people go through, a series of trainings together because then you're also building relationships and giving them a group of people that they could reach out and say, hey, I'm in this challenging situation. How do I go about doing this? Or
Hmm.
how have you done this before? So forming that middle layer of management and getting them to operate as a team, I think is critical. There's different ways of doing that, but I'm a big advocate of training, of having some, offsite meetings where you bring them together and invest in them. That is probably my number one recommendation. But then for the leader themselves, they have to build up that confidence and they have to make sure that they believe and understand that people do need to receive honest feedback and
Mhm.
authentic feedback. One of the cool things when ChatGPT was just coming out and, everyone's kind of playing with it, I love that it will kind of role play with you. And you can use that to script out some of your challenging conversations. It also, if you've done any personality tests, so I work with some organizations and I do a lot of training on Wiley disc model, so like
Mhm.
disc workplace.
Yep.
So or DISC. You can say, I'm a D style and I'm going to have a challenging conversation with an S style.
Mhm.
How can I make sure that I'm coming through in a way that's going to be well received by them? And so it can help you, tailor your delivery to the people on the other end, which I think is key as well.
Yeah, that's great. I had seen something like that. I don't know anybody that's ever implemented that role playing capability with some of these AI models, but I think that's phenomenal because I mean you basically answered the question before I got there, which was, outside, we all know when we get put into a situation, you really can't get around the experience. You just kind of have to go through some things. You have to do, in other words, right? And I was going to ask, at some point, people, whether they're ready for management or not, sometimes get placed there. And there is a difference of somebody who wants to be a manager versus somebody who is just put in a position because they're getting ready for another role, or maybe a leadership sees some potential in them. So I was going to ask, what can people do to be better at those types of situations? Because you just have to kind of play them out. So role playing with AI is great. I think that's one phenomenal task that anybody can do. And you can actually do that in the privacy of your own home. Are there other things that difficult conversations can be experienced without necessarily having them be in that, well, I have to put this, person on a performance plan, or, my team isn't reaching the levels that management wants me to reach. So are there other things that people can do outside of the role playing?
Big advocate for either reading books or I like Audible. I listen to books a lot. And I think it's great to do that, like if I'm out on a walk or something. I really do believe that we have to be constantly learning as leaders. And so investing in books, podcasts, anything out there where you can learn from others, if you have a leader, and I have learned sometimes more from leaders that maybe I didn't think were doing it well as I have from great leaders. So I think that you learn no matter what situation you're in. You should be learning from great leaders and not so great leaders. But if you have a leader from your past that you really respected and that you think did a great job of giving you feedback and mentoring you, maybe ask them to mentor you a bit more in your new people manager role or whatever leadership role you're in. So the 70-20-10 model is a learning and development model where it really focuses on 70% being on the job training. So I learned 70% of things through kind of that on the job. And then the 20% is more social, which would be through coaching or mentorship,
Hmm.
where really just 10% is that in the classroom training.
Hmm.
So we really have 90% of our learning outside of that formal training, which would be through, yeah, reading, learning from others, mentorship, coaching. And
I love that. That's so good. I haven't heard about that before. So I'm definitely going to look up that 70-30-10 or 70-20-10. I think that's great. Tell me about, because we have a lot of people that listen to us that are entrepreneurs, meaning they work for a bigger organization. Maybe they're not even at a manager level yet. Maybe they're just an individual contributor. What are some of the things that they should be thinking about? I love the real feedback. My wife is phenomenal with us. She will go in and she is not afraid to talk to her manager and sit them down and say, well, this is confusing, or I have this problem, or I'm going to go join a tiger team over here, right? I'm going to look up this person in this other department that falls outside of my job responsibilities. And that's something I never did when I was in, a bigger organization. But a lot of people are still trying to figure out, well, I don't really have a voice, or how do I make myself myself be seen or do a little bit more or grab the attention of management when I'm just this individual contributor? Is there something they can think about or something they can do that follows maybe that 70-20-10? Is there something like that that they can do?
I think asking great questions is a big part of doing good work because we should constantly be asking questions and learning things.
Hmm.
Asking questions, asking questions, asking questions. I think that's a big one.
Hmm.
Ask good and hard questions. So I love the example that you gave as well. I'm going to give some feedback. That's another one. So giving feedback shouldn't be specific to people managers, right? As an individual contributor, you could be giving your peers feedback, you can be giving your managers feedback. And so giving feedback, I think, applies to everyone. I was just talking with someone earlier today, and another thing that I think's key, you could do the best work in the world. So I'm doing my work and it's amazing work in my own little world. But if people can't connect you to that work, then it doesn't necessarily help you in the workplace. And so I think being visible, being out there and visible. So when you're talking about specific things, volunteer to present like a lessons learned type of session or volunteer to train people on this tool that you created.
Hmm.
Being visible is important in the workplace.
Yeah. I love that. Let's pull on that a little bit because I was thinking about it's ironic that you had that conversation this morning. I was thinking about this yesterday because with the habitual growth app, we're going to be going through a very big relaunch. I think I shared this with you in one of our prior conversations, but in the next 6 to 8 weeks, it's going to be a very different product. But if we don't market that, nobody knows we exist, right? We're not big enough. There's not tons of dollars. There's not millions of people using us yet. And so we have to force ourselves to be visible in a number of different capacities. That could be starting groups, it could be showing up at events, it could be reaching out to people individually. So, I don't think, at least for a lot of people, there's a big connection of the work and the visibility. I'd love to pull on your mind, like pull on the thread a little bit more. Like, how can people be more visible in these organizations? How can they connect themselves to the work that they're doing and then to this overall vision that corporate or management, is really trying to push throughout the organization?
First of all, I'm really excited about kind of your relaunch. Relations again on that. That is going to be exciting. Visibility, I think, first of all, we want to add value in everything that we do.
Hmm.
So when you're stepping out there, you're putting yourself out there and making yourself visible, make sure that it's value add
Hmm.
visibility, right? And
Hmm.
adding value. Oftentimes, there's a lot of cross functional working groups, or there's projects where they need people to raise their hand and say, I want to participate on this.
Hmm.
So, one, I do think talking to your manager and letting them know that you're excited to do more and you want an opportunity to do more.
Hmm.
And they might be able to help connect you with some of those. But then when you see those emails come out where, hey, we're looking for anyone that may want to be part of this group, raise your hand.
Hmm.
Raise your hand and do it. And does it mean more work? Oftentimes, yes. But if you're doing good work, it does get you that visibility.
Yeah. That's really good. I know, and for me, I didn't realize this until I was further along in my career. But when I started in a bigger organization, so I used to work for Shell Oil as an example, and you talk about hundreds of thousands, millions of employees, globally, to be able to stand out, or even in one refinery where I was at was hard. I used to work at Hewlett Packard as well in their real estate division. To stand out when you have all these people in corporate headquarters is hard sometimes. But I don't think on the flip side it's realized, especially people coming into their careers, how much that actually means to upper levels of management to have somebody volunteer. It is challenging to get people to say, hey, come over here, like we actually need help, but this is also for your benefit. So can you share from your perspective what you see when you're talking to some of these senior leaders within organizations to try to get people to maybe get a little bit uncomfortable, maybe to like challenge their team members a little bit more to volunteer or to expose themselves a little bit to be visible?
For leaders, I think motivating their team to volunteer, I think they need to start with the why. So, why is this important? Why is it that we're even putting this group together or putting this opportunity together? I think that sometimes there will be, a blast email. Hey, we're putting this together. Raise your hand if you want to be a part of it. But the messaging isn't always clear on the why. And start with why, right? That's one of the big things where if people understand the why behind something and the value that it's going to bring, I think they get more excited to be a part of it. And I'll use an example. When I left the Air Force, I went to Booz Allen Hamilton in Washington, D.C. And I actually think the larger the organizations, the more volunteer opportunities there are. And if you just start looking for them or asking about them, they'll start to open up. But they were looking for volunteers to mentor veterans. And that was one thing that I am passionate about is giving back to veterans. And so I raised my hand and I got paired up with a female veteran and served in kind of a mentorship type of role to them. And then next thing you know, they're having a dinner to thank those that raised their hands to be mentors with some very senior leaders within that organization. And so we're sitting around a relatively small table with people that did raise their hands. And so not only does it give you visibility, it gives you the opportunity to do something good for others in a lot of cases. And it puts you at a table where you wouldn't usually be at. Like it gives you access to other leaders.
Mhm.
So I know that was a long answer to your question, but I think the why is what leaders need to start with to get their team excited about these
Yeah,
opportunities.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a number of different like value propositions that come out of something like that. But and I guess I'm going to use my wife as another example. She works for a tech company, and they were looking for people to speak at one of their company events. She volunteered because she has a goal of hers to get out of her comfort zone. She wants to get a little bit more into public speaking, and she had to pitch. But what was really interesting about it is there was a process. And in doing that, she ended up becoming the closing speaker in front of her entire organization, which is a lot. Like, I'm not saying everybody wants to do that. It was speaking in front of 700 to 800 people on a stage, like big screens behind you, the whole 9 yards. But out of doing it, one, she challenged herself to grow a little bit more. That was important to her. So she had a goal. She wanted to see it. Two, to your greater point, she was actually introduced to somebody who has now become her mentor. And this is only 2 or 3 weeks ago. So now she has a mentor within the organization. And three, all of the senior leadership of that entire organization, I want to say it's almost 1,000 people at this point, now know who she is. Right. So they've seen her in a professional setting. They know she volunteers. She has this wide exposure. So she's got that personal growth. She has the connection and relationships with other people. And now she has made herself visible. Right. And so I think to your point of just saying, well, why am I doing this? Not necessarily what's the end goal, but like what could come out of this? What am I going to learn in the immediacy? But also, how can I string together some other wins? I think becomes really powerful. So go ahead.
I agree with you completely. And, if we want to be even more strategic,
Mhm,
we have to think about our personal branding.
mhm,
What do I want to be known for?
mhm,
So if I'm raising my hand to volunteer for something that is really out of my expertise or I don't really like to do, that's probably not going to get us the end results that we want.
mhm,
And so we can be really focused. And for anyone that doesn't have an opportunity within their organization, look for conferences that you could speak at, sign up for a TED talk. If you're very uncomfortable with public speaking and you just know that's not you, write an article, write a blog. There's so many ways to get your name out there associated with specific content or volunteering opportunities that will reinforce your personal branding. And I think the simplest way that personal branding was explained to me was, before entering a room or after leaving a room, like what do people think of when they think of you? And professionally, project management is probably the number one thing that comes to mind for me. I teach it. I've got a master's degree in it. I teach for Project Management Institute. Like I live and breathe project management. I have a lot of expertise in other areas as well, but that's oftentimes the first thing that people think of. And I love that because I love project management.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great. I'm gonna throw a loaded question at you because I like to. But I want to talk about getting your work to stick, and I'd love your perspective on what you've seen as you've been consulting through a variety. We talked about this before offline, but a variety of different industries, a variety of different companies and cultures and things like that. What is it? What are the characteristics that differentiate people that want to become visible, that want to do a little bit more versus those that are just kind of in the job? And I think really what I'm looking for is, are there specific mental capabilities or things like willingness, openness, humbleness to learn a little bit more, to grow personally versus those that just say, well, if I volunteer over here, it's just going to be more work and I don't want more work. Does the question make sense? Like I'm trying to, like, how do you differentiate? How do you know the difference between those people before you go too deep on somebody who just isn't necessarily willing to put in the work or doesn't see that full vision yet?
I like a book, it's called Decisive, and they talk about ooching in, like, let's dip our toe in the water before we dive in to make sure it's the right temperature.
Okay.
And I feel like starting small can be really good when you're working on, building trust with a person or with another organization. And this is a lot like how we work. We often, when we're working with a new client, will do a discovery phase
Hmm.
where we really need to get in and see where you're at and evaluate kind of your people, your processes, your tools before we can commit to a year-long engagement and promise you the world. I think that starting somewhere small when you're looking at, investing in an employee and making sure that you'll work well together, or, you're trying to help them develop their skill set or mentor them. I think that that could be a good thing. And you mentioned humble, and
Hmm.
that's actually was part of the conversation that I was having with the same individual earlier that I mentioned. I think that we're brought up to be humble, right? Do good work and be humble. And I think that that actually hurts us when it comes to connecting you with the good work that you're doing
Hmm.
and being visible.
Hmm.
So I think that we need to let go a little bit. Like, yes, we could still be humble and own the good work that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. And I'm glad you actually brought this up because I listened. There's somebody that I follow. He's a well-known. He's an influencer, but he actually goes out and runs multi-billion-dollar businesses. But he has actually been talking about humbleness a lot, or being humble a lot, because to your point, I think I'm going to use the word plague, but I think it's something that over time, unintentionally, like I think the intention of the word humble has been constructed to be very good. I think how it has been passed down between generations, different cultures, workforces, whatever, it's ended up becoming this behavior where if we're not meek, if we don't downplay our accomplishments, if we, you know, resist in silence instead of having a voice and expressing our opinion, then we're not humble. And he actually takes the opposite stance, which is like, no, you should be vocal, you should have boundaries, you should, tout your accomplishments to some, to a reasonable level. Like obviously you don't want to be braggadocious and shove it in people's faces, but you should be proud of the things that you've worked hard to get. But you're also open to feedback. You're also willing to put in more work. You're also willing to help and serve other people. And I think I like that because I think it's a really strong juxtaposition of how most people perceive being humble versus how I've learned to now think about being humble and encourage others to say, no, you're doing all these really good things. You are on your way. Like, keep going, show people, become visible, like, put in more work because it's going to get you closer to the success that you're craving, even if it isn't necessarily portrayed in what the word is, I guess, defined by culture these days.
I love everything that you just shared, and I agree with how you just described it to me as well. Like, I think we could be humble, and
Yeah.
I think what hurts us is ego and not putting our ego to the side. And we've talked a lot about giving feedback. We also need to develop a skill set to receive feedback.
Hmm.
And where I like to start when I'm training leaders on this is to tell them to say thank you when they get feedback. I think that the natural response sometimes is to get defensive.
Hmm.
And so we need to develop a skill set to receive feedback and actually reflect on that because perception is everything.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter if we intended to behave in a certain way or not. If it's perceived by others a certain way and they're giving us feedback that's going to help us grow, I always say, smile, say thank you,
Hmm.
and process it.
Yeah.
Actually sit with it over time. And then you can go back and have further conversation if desired. But it shuts people down from giving you feedback if they know every time they give you feedback, you're going to get defensive.
Yes.
you're really just hurting yourself.
Yeah. 100%. And would you say that let's maybe combine the ego, being humble, open, going back to kind of one of the pieces of our earlier conversation where you said leading by influence. Is that what typically makes a good leader? Are those some of the characteristics? I'm sure there's a lot more, but are those some of the characteristics that make a really good top of the food chain helping direct an organization?
I think so. And I think being clear, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I think being really clear on expectations and, we've talked about giving feedback, but culture is the worst behavior that you're willing to accept.
Mhm.
That's your organizational
Love
culture.
that.
And you see where people, I don't want to give that person feedback because they're a difficult person or they're the squeaky wheel. And so we're going to let them have an exception and just behave this certain way, but everyone else is going to be held to different standards. It doesn't work like that. When you lower the bar, everyone starts lowering to that bar because if they can do it, then I can do it.
Mhm.
And so being clear on what is expected and holding people accountable. And that really comes down, I think, to values. Organizational values is a big part of it.
That's so good. Well, I wrote that quote down and I'm going to use that. I'm going to borrow that.
Please.
I'm not going to say I'm going to steal it, but culture is the worst behavior you're willing to accept. And I think across the board, that is 100% true. The way it's been described to me, which I agree with, is, if somebody starts at 100%, Candace starts at 100%, right? And as she works down the layers of the organization, well, the next layer might get 95% of it, right? Because we're never going to hit 100, 100, 100 as we go down the levels of the organization. So if you're at a 50, that you're explaining it, what your expectations or boundaries are to the next level, well, that's probably going to drop at least to a 45, maybe a 40, or could be lower if your expectations and communication aren't set. Do you agree with that? Have you seen that happen in every organization, most organizations?
Say I've seen it happen. And I wouldn't say necessarily most organizations
Okay.
because I think that, it does depend on the type of industry as well. And, the people that you have there and what's the history of the organization and on and on. But I do agree that kind of the cascading down that there can sometimes be a disconnect from the top of the organization to the individual contributors. And that does cause challenges.
Yeah.
You know, I would add one really important thing, though. I know we're talking about the organizational culture now, but to go back to your previous question about, good leadership qualities,
Hmm.
a big one is self awareness. It's
Hmm.
self awareness. It's know where your strengths are, know where your weaknesses are,
Hmm.
and you need to bring people that have strengths where you were weak.
Hmm.
And so I could be a great leader. I could be a great CEO of an organization. And, maybe I'm not that great at finances. But if I have a really good CFO by my side that is able to paint the picture and give me the data to make good decisions, I could still be very successful.
Yeah.
So it's knowing where your strengths are and where maybe you've got some blind spots and then surrounding yourself with a great team.
Yeah, that's really good, and I think that comes down. Self awareness is a huge one. We talk about it all the time here in habitual growth. I think that's comes with maturity. I think it comes with experience. Maybe some role playing with Chat GPT or something. Maybe I'm not as good as framing the conversation as I should be. I want to talk about the level of communication for expectations. And as you were speaking, you brought up something that was really interesting because this morning I was having a conversation. I was actually listening to a gentleman who does consulting for a living as well, but he was talking about the word boundaries and he was actually articulating this in the way of it was a real estate conference. And so he was talking about how he handles conversations and expectations by setting boundaries early on in the relationship with his clients.
Mm.
What really caught my attention when you had mentioned core values and the communication of them, I have this belief that most people want to be led. And I don't know how true that is, but in my own personal experience, I think there are people that are leaders that either are developing to become the best leader themselves. Or as an example, I have a lot of friends who just don't want to be leaders. They want to follow somebody they trust, that loves them, that supports them, but they have no interest in making the decisions and being that leader, but they fit very comfortably in organizations, or, just in doing the work as maybe an individual contributor or something like middle management. Nothing wrong with either of those. But your comment around core values made me think about his comment revolving around boundaries. And I think it comes back to those difficult conversations where if you're not articulating the core values of an organization, if you're not willing to set a boundary and say, this is the expectation and here's why, let me tie it back to the core values of the organization. I think that really can degrade the culture within the organization, but more importantly, it leads to that gray area that you alluded to early on in the discussion here, where people just don't know. They don't know right from wrong. But when you have a strong leader that stands up and says, no, this is why, and they can level set, people seem to respect that a little bit more, if that makes sense. They're almost willing to follow that person more because they have set those boundaries. In your experience and what you see and actually what you teach, how does that play into your curriculum or into developing better leaders that are at a personal level and an organizational level?
I have a couple of different ways I want to approach this one.
Okay.
Uh, First and foremost, I think it's like defining scope for a project. Here's what's in scope. I'm building a swimming pool in my backyard. I want a diving board. I don't want a lifeguard chair. When you're going through, it's defining very clearly what you want and also defining what is not included. And I think when we're talking about expectations, where sometimes organizations fall short, whether it's associated with values or other, is they don't take it that step further where clear behaviors or examples of behaviors are given. So we need to take it a step further and not just have these fancy words. We need to understand what it looks and feels like to live and breathe that and show up every day and behave in a certain way.
Mm,
And so I've worked with organizations before where we're having some cultural issues and here are our values and we still believe they're the right values. And we've said, okay, well, let's build out really specific behaviors that you want to see your team members displaying that shows that they're embracing and agree with these values.
mm,
So that's been helpful. And, Air Force again, I'll give you that example: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all that we do. It is just hammered into you in basic training,
mhm,
and they're non negotiable. Integrity first. You better not lie. You'd better not do anything
mhm,
unethical. And, you get really clear on what behaviors and what showing up for your team looks like for each of those.
mhm,
And so when we talk about the expectations and the behaviors, what is it that you don't want to see as well? And when we're talking about boundaries, I think it can be similar. Like, here's how we will work together. I'm a consultant, you're my client, and here's how we won't work together. I don't want you to call me at midnight on myself to ask me a random question, those types of things. So clear is kind.
I love that. And by the way, I'm going to share, my wife loves Brene Brown as we do. Habitual growth is, and when you go into our login screen, you can see some of the quotes there. We've got a lot of Brene Brown. She's phenomenal. Are you seeing, I love that example of like, what behaviors do you want to see in the workplace? Can you trace that back to core values? Is it oftentimes, and I'm just going to use bigger organizations now because I think that's more effective for a lot of our audience, but any size of organization, is it important, number one, that they have the core values displayed? And so are you finding that they don't have core values developed, or they're just not adhering to what they represent or what they are meant to represent, meaning the leadership isn't enforcing those behavioral or psychological rules in the workplace, and hence the culture kind of deviates from what those core values are meant to represent?
Think that sometimes values are created with a bunch of leaders that they get together and they say, here's our values, oftentimes pretty early on
Mm,
with organization standing up. And maybe they don't get built in as the organization's scaling to all of the important processes.
mhm,
So new employees should know those values early on and know what that means
mhm,
and how they are intended to behave. And if that's not part of an employee's onboarding from day one, then maybe they go out and see those values on the website before they come for an interview, and then they're gone. So it should be something that is kind of lived and breathed and built into the culture and built into meetings. So maybe there's a slide at the beginning of an all hands meeting and they cover a different value every month.
Mhm.
So it needs to be more than just words on your website.
Gotcha. I love that. I think that's good. And for what it's worth, that was one of the first things that I've developed for any company that I have had because of that. We're still small. We're a growing organization, but I can already say, if I have a VA, that's just as important as somebody who's sitting right beside me here in the office, where I'm saying, do you understand our core values? Do you understand why we behave the way that we do? What does this mean to you personally? So that said, it would do us an injustice if I did not ask about your book, because all of this actually has to do with decision making. And you have a book called Good Decisions Equals Success. So, number one, what does that mean to you? What do good decisions mean to you? Let's define that up front. And then how has that played out kind of in your own life? And then we can roll from there.
For me, good decisions equal success. I think it's personal and I think it's professional. And so we have to own our own life. And I'm a big believer of that. So leaders within an organization, individual contributors within an organization. And I do think individual contributors can be leaders as well. I don't think you have to be a people manager to
100%.
be a leader. So I'll define that. But I think that you have to know what success looks like to you.
Mhm.
Like, what type of home do you want to live in? Where do you want to live? Like, be clear on what those goals are personally and professionally. And then the good decisions equal success. It gets you there. You have to have the criteria of what is success to
Mhm.
start working towards it.
Mhm.
So I really do. I kind of live it, breathe it. I believe in it. I think that we are in control of our own destiny,
Yeah.
and that if we're not clear on where we want to be, kind of any road will get us there. So we need to take the road that gets us to where we want to be, which is our dream life.
Yeah. Well, the way so number one, I am gonna read this. I'm gonna go pick up the book this week. Because I wish I would have found this a long time ago, but I spent a lot of my life drifting. And so I am living proof that good decisions, when you have a vision that you're working towards, mean the world. Is actually part of the reason why habitual growth was developed. But at the same time, going back to what we were just talking about with core values, you can only make good decisions when you have that vision of where you want to go, what you want in your life. And that vision, right, is to me what those core values represent. And then you can start making the decisions behind that vision to say, okay, well, is this serving me? Is this helping me? Is this detrimental to my health or my mental, my holistic well being or my relationships, right? But I oftentimes find that most people don't really think about it that far in the future, especially younger employees of larger organizations. When you kind of get into the workforce, you're not used to taking responsibility for your life. How do you encourage people maybe to take more responsibility into their life, maybe start making better decisions for themselves?
My co-author of this book, Damon Lemby, he runs an organization. They just hit 30 years. It's called Learn It.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think right there is also proof he's made some good
Yeah.
decisions, or very much a storyteller. But when we talk about how do we start encouraging people to make kind of better decisions, I think first and foremost, and we have an 8-step process in the book defining things that, step by step you should do in order to get the best outcomes from that decision. And step one really focuses on defining intent.
Mhm.
So if we can't define the intent and what success looks like at the very beginning, then the decision may be for nothing. So what is it if I'm, deciding to move to another city and I'm trying to make a decision on where I'm going to move? Well, what's the intent of your move? What is it that you want to get out of this move? Are you wanting more land? Are you wanting to be in a city where you have more career opportunities and walkable to restaurant? Like, what is it? So I think that we need to get really clear there first,
Mhm.
and from there, we can go through the rest of the decision making process. But for every decision, I say, know what successful outcomes look like, what the intent of the decision is, and, go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I just want to break this down one layer further because it's something that honestly I've struggled with for a long time. And it was actually one of my business partners that kind of helped me understand a little bit more about it. But when people talk about vision, they often talk about it and like, well, what do you want your life to live like in to look like in 10 years? And it's like, I have no idea. I'm 21 years old or 22 years old. Like I want to make some money and I want, have a good time, whatever it is. Obviously that changes over time. So when you're talking to people about a vision, about working towards a goal, what's your timeline that you share with them? Do you tell them it's temporary or it can evolve? Or, is it just this is it and you're going to work towards this thing until it becomes less important for you?
That's a great question. And we talk a lot in the book about high impact decisions.
Hmm.
And, if you're trying to figure out what you're going to have for lunch, do you need to go through an 8-step decision making process? Probably not. So we
You
often
don't
get to
know me that well, Candace. Okay. I might.
for you? Okay. Well, for you, we'll leave that to you. But people will say, well, how do you define a high impact decision? Like, how do you define that in life? How do you define that in your organization? And the answer is very much a project manager answer. It depends. So if you are a startup organization and trying to get enough funding, we're trying to get VC funds to get us through the next 12 months. Am I going to go in there and ask them to think about 10 years from now? Like, it really depends on where a person is in their life and where an organization is,
Hmm.
like, here and now.
Hmm.
If it's a mature organization and they have plenty of cash in the bank and they're wanting to think about like a bold strategic move, then we may look a little bit further out. And so it's very much going to be, it depends based on the organization, what it is they're trying to accomplish, or where a person is in their life.
Perfect answer. Perfect answer. I don't have anything else to add on that one. But since we're talking about good decisions, and as we kind of wind down here, what are two or three good decisions? I'm going to phrase them as good decisions, not just decisions, but good decisions that our listeners can take today or tomorrow to start moving in a direction that helps them succeed in their own lives and in terms of however they define success.
So, what are 2 or 3 good decisions that they can make?
Yeah. So, do I have a vision? Do I need to go create a vision? Do I just need to sit down and think through an 8-step process about what I'm having for dinner? Right. I don't think there's anything right or wrong here, but really, what are some things that our listeners can take on that are actionable that they can do that maybe helps them set up to make future better decisions for themselves?
I mean, I want to be a little selfish. First one is go buy good decisions equal success
100%.
and
100%. That
read the
is a great
book.
decision right there.
Read the book. That's a great decision.
That's right.
2, get clear on what you want. And I'm actually a big advocate. I think this surprises some people. I create vision boards. I
Mm,
have one right over here. I
mhm,
create vision boards for kind of my personal life and for my organization.
mm,
And so, again, the goal setting, and I review them once a year. So I usually like to do it over the holidays, getting ready to go into the new year.
mhm,
But what is it that I want to create for myself and for my business? And so, vision boarding. I go out, I get a bunch of magazines, I get a big kind of thick poster board, and I cut out pictures and I set some goals.
yeah.
Once you've got your goals and you're figuring out kind of next steps, you start making decisions that align with your goals.
Mhm.
So, that would be something that I say do first and foremost.
Yeah, I love that. And just to support that, you can't see it similar to you. I have a vision board here. And full transparency, I never did it until this year. It's something that, and I'm in this space, and I've had so many people say, go create a vision board, it'll change your life. And it really does because you can put yourself in the situations. And I did the whole weird thing. To me, it's weird when people would cut up pictures of themselves and put it on somebody else's body, but I did the whole thing. And then I actually went and found affirmations, very specific things that I put over top of the pictures. So now I can visualize myself in this scenario, or I have a car in here and I have a couple houses, but then I say, this is why I have this house in here and this is what it does for me. And so I actually have an affirmation on top of the visual, which I found really just moves the needle in the right direction. Justly, it starts to pull us in this direction. So I think that is a great decision. Both of those, go get the book, Good Decisions, and then create a vision board are great tactics anybody can do and take action on tomorrow.
I love that, and congrats on creating your first vision board. It's a big, exciting thing. If I had to say a third, if I had to throw a third one in there, like, get clear on your values if you're not, and stick with them. I mean, when you're working towards goals, there may be a path that is easier than another,
Hmm.
but it's gray and it just doesn't align with your values, skip it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think personal values are really important to stick with and carry with you as a leader.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are so great. Well, Candace, this has been phenomenal. I have learned so much from you, as I already knew I was going to, but I've got quotes here. I've got some Brene Brown things that I'm going to bring back to my wife already. So before we wind down, how can people find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. LinkedIn is a great one. So Kandis Porter. And I also have a YouTube channel that is focused on project management. So any and all information that you want about project management, it's out there on the YouTube channel, in addition to several videos on decision making if that interests them.
Amazing. And I think anybody, even if you're not in project management, should go tune in, listen to this stuff, pick up the materials, because even if you're not in project management, I love the sequence of steps, the logic that you share, how you line things out, because it doesn't necessarily have to apply to a project, but every project can be something in somebody's life. And so I love the parallels of that and the information that you share. So I think it's really
Thanks for having me, Nathan. It's been
awesome. This has been great. Thank you, Candace. We will chat soon, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again as well.
awesome. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye.